Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Hey, Kurt, have you ever worked in an organization, or maybe you had a client where everything just feels harder than it should? Too familiar?
No, never had that.
Okay.
Maybe. Wait, let me think. Are you maybe meaning like where simple tasks require 5 approvals and 3 meetings and then 10 follow-up emails in order to go, hey, can I buy this pencil set or not? Is that something like that?
Well, as my friends from Chicago would say, exactly.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, I mean, when systems themselves start working against you, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, and you know, at least for myself, I typically look at that and I go, all right, what's the cause of this? Well, it has to be the bureaucracies, the bad process design that these companies do. I mean, come on, guys, just get an engineer in there and we can fix it like that, right?
Right. But what if it isn't the systems that are the root cause? What if the systems are actually just symptoms of what we're experiencing?
What? Okay, now you've got my attention.
All right. Okay. So in today's episode, we're sharing my conversation with Tom Rieger, the author of Breaking the Fear Barrier. Tom explains how these barriers, these rules and silos and inefficiencies are often self-created.
Yeah, self-created by whom, Tim? Who creates these?
By all of us. By all of us. They're driven by something deeply human. It's the fear of losing something like status or control or resources or maybe even reputation or relationship.
Loss aversion.
There you go.
There we go. So what you're saying is that the walls we build up to protect ourselves can end up trapping not only us, but also the other people that are in the organization, that are on our teams. Is that correct?
Very insightful there, youngster. And it's also a little bit uncomfortable to think about that, right? But that's what makes it a perfect Behavioral Grooves conversation.
All right. So with that, I'm going to ask all of our listeners to sit back and relax with a warm elixir of fear relief and enjoy our conversation with Tom Rieger.
Tom Rieger, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you here. We're going to get started with our famous speed round. Infamous, right. Maybe. Yeah. So first question, would you prefer to learn a new language or a new instrument?
Oh boy, probably a new language.
Really? Does anyone come to mind?
I need to brush up on my Spanish.
Yeah.
And maybe even Greek.
Greek. Wow. Do you have a fundamental understanding of Greek already?
None whatsoever, but I got a couple Greek clients.
Oh, okay. So necessity is the mother of invention,
yes.
Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been playing keyboards my whole life, so I don't want to learn anything new. So
yeah, okay. All right, good. Okay, terrific. We'll come back to that later. Coffee or tea?
Coffee, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
My wife is a tea drinker, and we argue every morning about where to get coffee or tea.
Wow. It's a source of friction, or is it like a spirited
really
kind of?
But there are some great coffee places, and then there's some great tea places. So we try to like balance.
Oh,
argue is not the right word. More negotiate.
Okay. Well, since we kind of live in the same area, we'll have to actually talk about that offline as to what your favorite spots are. Because I'm a tea drinker and Katie's a coffee drinker.
Okay. So you can relate.
Exactly. We're kind of in the same boat.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Third speed round question. True or false? Barriers of corporate success are most likely just to spring up overnight and tend to catch everybody off guard.
It's the first part of your statement is false. They don't spring up overnight. And the second part of your statement is true. They do catch people off guard.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. So that was these false dichotomies, and the way that we set these up, because it is something that we really do want to talk about in
Yeah.
greater length as to how this comes about. Last speed round question: is it fair to say that organizational fear is the most critical problem facing global firms today?
I do think that's fair to say because when we really get into the root cause of these problems, a lot of times it is fear, but it's specifically fear of loss. And we could talk about that more.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
we absolutely will. And of course, hopefully this is coming through. But we're talking about the fear barrier with Tom Rieger today, and we you'll get no argument from us, from Kurt and I, that fear is a terrible, terrible problem in the corporate world today. It's an inhibitor to investment and innovation and creativity and all sorts of employee and leadership issues. But let's go back to, if we could, let's return to when you wrote the book. What was the cause? What caused you to write the book?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tim. So, back then I was with the Gallup organization. I'd worked there for a long time, 17 years. And I was brought into a number of different accounts to try to figure out why they were stuck. They were doing their measurement, they were doing their planning meetings, but after a couple of years, they weren't getting that same amount of improvement that they were initially. And it was all sorts of different types of companies. It was some government agencies. It was a candy factory in New Jersey. It was a pet food company in Europe. It was all sorts of different things, call centers, insurance companies. And it was like I was seeing the same movie again and again. And it was also like all the traditional things that I thought I would find were dead wrong. It wasn't anything rational. It was fear. And it wasn't fear in the sense that people were like cowering under their desks. It was fear of loss. It was I am held to the fire to meet this goal, to get through the year with these resources, to make myself not look bad, to make sure no one misuses this information. And because now I'm responsible for my department, my focus just becomes my department. And that fear of losing something, losing a bonus, not hitting a goal, losing respect would drive me to create walls to protect myself. The problem is sometimes those walls make it difficult for other people to do what they need to do by
Yeah.
setting up all these rules and policies, that often are too restrictive. And that was the root cause of almost all the types of barriers I found that was leading to rework, turnover, cost inefficiencies. The list goes on and on.
You said you were surprised that this wasn't what you were expecting. What were you expecting?
I was expecting, okay, we'll do like some process mapping, we'll, do some leadership coaching, and that'll make all the problems go away.
Sure,
And
boom.
yeah, no, that didn't work at all. And, I
No.
was fortunate to be able to spend some time with Danny Kahneman, who had a relationship with Gallup. And I was so fascinated with the behavioral economics work and research around biases that he was doing. And that's really the heart of what we were seeing play out is all these biases, different reference points and loss aversion that was really creating these walls and these artificial realities that people were creating for themselves.
We want to get back to this discussion about Kahneman and biases, because that's absolutely central to what behavioral groups is all about. But before we get there, I want to spend just a little bit more time on sort of the core elements of the book. What do you think is the most sort of insidious outcomes or results of fear?
So probably the most insidious that you find is a loss of trust for
Mm,
management, for leadership.
yeah.
You see an immense increase in rework, which will absolutely kill a company. And you see a lot of interdependental conflict, and it follows a progression, right? It starts with this narrowing of focus, where you have a lot of what we call parochialism, a my way or the highway attitude. And like if you ever saw Monsters Inc.
Yeah,
and
loved it. Yes.
you forgot to do your paperwork and nothing could happen until you did your paperwork, that's
Right.
parochialism. Left unchecked, that leads to territorialism. It's like hoarding information, hoarding resources, imbalanced accountability and empowerment. And then if that's left unchecked and people feel their self-sufficiency is threatened, then they start empire building. And then you have cost overruns, duplicate functions. I was brought into a call center for a major credit card company. They had 6 different departments trying to make changes to their system at the same time and crashing again and again and again.
Wow. It's one of those things that when we've talked about this in the past, that it just sounds so obvious, right? Like, oh, how could a company do that? It's ridiculous. No company in their right mind would do something like that.
Right?
And yet, and yet you have evidence, you have data that this happens over and over again.
Oh, some things that you look at are just silly, but when you trace why they're there, there's always a valid reason. And something, Tim, that's really important. We go in with the assumption that everybody's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
You just have to get into their heads to say, well, what do they think the right thing is? And what are they being held accountable to?
Yeah.
Like when we did some work at NASA, for example, there was something called the Goddard Way, which was, their way of doing things. And there was such passion around their mission. They would say when the rocket took off, they felt like their soul was lifting. But failure is catastrophic. So anything that I am responsible for that might impact that mission, I am going to make darn sure that nothing is going to get in the way of that, even if it's going to make life harder for someone down the line.
Yeah. Yeah. So there could be negative ripple effects from that level of autonomy.
Absolutely. And the other thing that complicates all of this is what I call the ghosts. So ghosts are, there's 4 types of rules that I talk about in the book.
Yep.
Gospels, absolute, always do X no matter what. Guidelines, which are more conditional, like, do this only if this happens. Unfortunately, most things are gospels, even things that should be guidelines. Ground rules, which are where you really want to be. It's like, you're a smart person. Here are the guardrails. Use your judgment.
Mm-hmm.
But the most damaging type of rule isn't really even a rule. It's a ghost. It's either something that's no longer relevant,
right,
or it's just the way we've always done things here, even if that's no longer really relevant. But those things stick and stick and stick. And those are the building bricks that make up the walls of the silos of parochialism.
Yeah. You've kind of clicked through the 4 horsemen of the fear apocalypse here. and I just want to sort of call attention to them and make sure that we're noting them individually, because the book is structured in a way that you talk about these 4 pillars, and then you talk about sort of the costs and the problems that go along with it, as well as the potential solutions. We're talking about fear of loss, parochialism, territorialism, and empire building, right? So of those, and there's a bit of a progression in there, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Talk about that if you would.
So, think about it this way. When an organization grows, right? I mean, you start out as basically a garage band, to use a music analogy, right?
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And then you get to the point where you got your first big gig and you have to start, now you have sound guys, and then now you have a roadie crew.
Yeah.
And the same thing's true in an organization. You may not even have had an HR department to start with. Well, now you need an HR person. Mm-hmm. Well, now they've grown, so now you need a training department. Then you need a recruiting department. Then you need someone to manage performance management, et cetera, et cetera. Same with service, with sales, with your engineering team.
And inherently, those aren't inherently bad things, right?
No, not at all. But then you give control of those departments to individuals, and then somewhere along the line, it becomes my department, and the endowment effect kicks in. And so the resources I control become more important to me. And I will protect those resources at all costs because I need them to do what I am held to the fire to do. And that's where the parochialism temptation starts to come into play.
Right.
We can't trust these guys to do their thing. We have to have them do it our way. And then in the face of that, then they're like, well, these guys are slowing us down. So we got to just tightly control what we can because we got to hit our goals, right? And that's where the territorialism starts to build.
Mm-hmm.
And then when people feel like I'm not going to be able to get what I've done because these guys are holding up, we need to either have a duplicate function to like hire our own people or our own engineering team or our own QA team or our own this team. Then that's the empire building that starts to happen.
Yeah.
And it just starts spreading like a spider web. And when you're in the organization, it seems like these are things that are insurmountable because they're outside of your control. They're happening elsewhere. But you know what? These things were not, imposed upon high, and ordained through some supernatural force. It's something you did to yourself. So if it's something you did to yourself, if you have the courage to look in the mirror and take your shift away from the piece and get back to your focus on the puzzle, then you can really start to look at, okay, no, wait a minute. The bigger picture is this. This is my role in that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
My role is not an end in of itself. And then you can start making those trade-offs.
Yeah.
You guys really need that information. You know what, Fred, why don't you go spend some time helping those guys out? Because that's the critical path right now. If you start to achieve that change in mindset.
Kurt and I have both seen lots of organizations ourselves. And one of the things that I've gotten to see up close is when that parochialism and that territorialism becomes so important that the ideas that people start to surface aren't, this is what's best for the company, but this is what I think the boss will like. And,
yes, absolutely right.
And that it just becomes like this terrible virus when the people who are serving up the ideas to some kind of middle management to get to senior leadership, I'm always amazed at the number of people who are really struggling with solving the problem for what do we think the boss will like? What do you think the boss is going to say yes to? And I don't want to get to the solutions on that, but how common is that?
It's very common. People do what they're incented to do, what their performance management to do with the pressure that they're given. And that pressure comes from somewhere, but then you got to go talk to that boss and say, what are you worried about? What are you held accountable to?
Right.
What are some of the conflicts you feel like yourself in the middle? Where do you feel like you can't even open your mouth? I mean, here's a statistic for you. Only 4% of top leaders in some data that we found recently feel comfortable that believe that their opinions will be valued if they speak up. So that means either they're not going to say a word, or if they do say a word, it's not going to be listened to. 4%.
It's so hard for me to get my head around that. Really, that tiny little number. And I love talking to Gallup guys. We've had former colleagues of yours, Rod Wagner. We just recently talked to Marcus Buckingham. And so Gallup guys come to the table with a lot of good data. I just love that, actually. Okay, let's get back to the Kahneman and Tversky work that you said you worked with Danny Kahneman about these common human biases that get in our way. So in the book, you have a great story about loss aversion, which is a big, part of prospect theory and a big part of our motivations and how we make decisions. Can you talk about how loss aversion specifically relates to fear?
Sure. And this gets back, thank you for mentioning prospect theory, because that is probably my single favorite piece of behavioral economic research ever.
Stuff.
If I were a teenager, I'd have a big poster of prospect theory.
You can still. I want to give you permission.
I can still do it. Maybe,
you can still have a big poster.
I may do that. Boy, I just sound like the world's biggest nerd after saying that. That's all right. I'm going to own that.
It's okay. Yeah.
But think of it this way. So let's say that, let me take one step back. In classical economics, if you're better off in any way, you should be happy, right? Mm-hmm. In behavioral economics, mostly based on the prospect theory work that Kahneman and Tversky did back in the 70s, They found that's not really quite true. It depends on your reference point.
Yeah.
So let's say you're used to getting, I don't know, like a 5% raise every year. And this year, your boss calls you into his office and says, Tim, great job. You're getting a 2% raise.
Yeah.
Better off. So are you happy?
Yeah.
But you're better off, right? You're 2% better off.
Yes.
But you don't look at it that way. You expected a 5, you got a 2. You think, well, I'm short 3.
Mm-hmm.
So to you, it's a 3% loss. Now, what if you haven't gotten a raise in 10 years and all of a sudden they're like, you know what? We had a good year. I'm giving you a 2% bump. Are you happy?
Ecstatic.
It's the same 2%.
Yeah.
The same 2%, but the difference is the reference point. And now think about an organization where you have a legal department saying, oh, no, we need 6 weeks to open an account. And the salespeople are saying, but our competitors do it in a day. Or, you have the call center, especially one that may have just put in an AI system saying, we're going to close tickets and close tickets and close tickets. And that may mean we're going to send a lot of field techs out. And the field service department is saying, stop, just stop. We don't have any more slots. Just stop. So that sort of thing happens all the time because of these different reference points. And that creates this like, oh my Lord, I am not going to succeed to hit what I'm being held accountable to based on the reference point that's been set for me, unless I put up these walls.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Kurt, and we want to say thanks for listening to Behavioral Grooves. And we hope that you're enjoying this episode, but it feels a little bit one-sided. You're hearing from us, but we're not hearing from you.
This is Tim, and we have 2 suggestions to remedy that. The first is join our Facebook page and engage with us.
We want to talk with you. We want to hear your perspectives, and hopefully our Facebook page might be the place to have some of that interaction. So please come and join us.
The other recommendation we have for you is to leave us a quick rating. The little 5-star thing at the bottom of your app, or a short review. Just leave us a few words about what you like about behavioral groups. We'd very much appreciate it.
Thanks, and we now return you to our regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah, what other common biases? Are there some biggies that also come into play with fear-related issues?
There are some that were originally, and I think there's some new ones that we're seeing play an even bigger role. Framing effects, I think, of course, play a very big role, because let me put it this way. If you want to send out a note saying, can somebody please get better at taking out the trash? Then your design engineers are going to say, well, we need a better trash can. And then your safety people are going to say, well, we need to separate out the toxic from the non-toxic stuff. And then, your procurement people will say, well, how much is this going to cost us? Do we need to budget this into our time? And then on and on and on. And no one's actually going to take out the trash, because you have all these different, these different frames coming into everything. Confirmation bias is rampant because you have people, picking and choosing information to solidify their arguments, solidify their points. A lot of it comes down to, there's a great article by Jonathan Haidt called, I think, The Tail Wagging the Dog. I may have that wrong, but basically people become, in his words, salesmen or lawyers trying to argue their case instead of a judge when judging how to move forward. It becomes about winning your argument. And that leads to a lot of these problems. What we're seeing now is other issues, and one of them is the curse of knowledge. With all the AI workflows that are being put in place, it's so easy to assume, well, why doesn't this thing, I know in my head what I want it to do. Why isn't it doing it? Because I have all this knowledge I assume others have, even not just this AI agents, but others impacted by it. And they have their own reference points, and that gets back to prospect theory. It all ties together.
Yeah. Beautifully said. It really does all tie together. These things don't stand on their own. And yet, for the purpose of writing the book, I think you broke these 4 pillars down really, really beautifully. Let's kind of move into that part about you're talking about AI, and I think we're at a point where we should really talk about sort of what is new, or what what are the new lenses that we should be looking at, and what's the new data that you have to bring to the fear barrier discussion? Is fear still an issue today?
Fear is still an issue, but I
Okay.
would say there's a new layer to that pyramid, beyond the empire building.
Okay.
And let me kind of take one step back to tell you like how we found this and what we're seeing. Some of this came through all the remote work. Some of it came through the fear that comes with, is AI going to replace my job, or is it going to be, if I'm using it to help me, is it actually going to help me? Is it going to just create more work? And we've seen both, cases where it works great, cases where it doesn't. But you combine that with the remote work, and there's a couple of really interesting patterns that we're seeing. The first is you have this underlying epidemic of silence, where there's this fear of speaking up, as I mentioned before. Overall, about 30% of employees. We found that. World Economic Forum found similar data. Gallup published a study with similar data with opinions, people feeling their opinions counting. So that's a pretty well validated number. Only about 30% of people feel like they have a voice. And then you're taking those people out of your corporate culture often and putting them in an ice flow. You're putting them in a remote environment. You're cutting them off from their peers.
Right.
And if I could quote Aristotle, nature abhors a vacuum. And if you have a vacuum of information, of culture, of something else, it's going to get filled. It's not going to get filled by anything healthy. It's going to get filled by Reddit. It's going to get filled by my peers who are equally angry at the world. It's going to get filled by my little parochial ice flow of a world.
Yeah.
And that creates this new phenomenon that we're seeing. Maybe it's always been there, but it's really bad now, that we call shadow realities, where it goes beyond just the ghosts, where you have an entire worldview that may not even be close to being accurate, but you believe it is absolute gospel truth. And that guides your trust or lack thereof in leadership. Even your idea of what do I have to do? And that's where a lot of this rework is coming from. Because, okay, I have my own version of why I'm doing this, which may not even be right. I have no real way to ask questions, or I don't feel comfortable doing it. So I'm just going to create something and throw it over the wall. And then the ghetto's like, well, no, that's not what I need. That's not what I asked for. Go back and do it again. Do it this way.
Yeah.
And that happens, over and over and over. $4.7 billion or $1 million on average for a medium-sized company in rework. 200% average cost overruns for software companies based on rework. And a lot of it, I think you can trace to these shadow realities and the lack of communication that fosters. And again, it's all reinforced by fear at the end of the day.
So how do we get through that? What my mind is going to alignment. Like I think about just have a good alignment session. But of course, my guess is that your premise is there's something much deeper than just, the manager and the subordinate just getting aligned. There's fear underneath this.
Yeah, and I would add a third component in there. You have to get managers, subordinates, and now these AI agents and systems.
Okay. Okay, great.
I mean, let me
Give me an
not
example.
answer your question by answering a different one, and then I'll come back around to what you
Okay.
said. So let's say you're hiring a new employee to do a really important function. And you're going to say, okay, I'm going to give you no training really. I'm going to give you a bunch of data about past things we've done. I'm not going to let you talk to any of the other departments that are going to be impacted by your work. I'm not going to ingrain you in our culture at all. I'm going to give you incomplete instructions and expect you to do a perfect job. That's how we're treating AI. And it's like, oh, well, no, you just need to learn a better prompt. Well, that doesn't work. Oh, no, you just need to build context in your data pipeline and your prompt. And that helps, but doesn't really work. And this is where I come back to your original problem. The key is to stop treating AIs as ice flows in and of themselves. And same thing with different departments. You need to map all of the interdependencies, align all of the constraints for your organization as a whole.
Yeah.
And instead of just saying, do I need one banana or two bananas? Build a response function in n-dimensional space where you can say, okay, across all these variables, I have three options, which for the overall organization is going to be the best.
Yeah.
Not just how can I close more tickets. And that requires more work up front. We're starting to do a fair amount of work on AI readiness, but the work is the same, quite frankly, as identifying these barriers. And that, to get to your question, what do? You first need to assess where are they happening, and then get to the root causes of why they're happening. Then figure out, okay, what are you ultimately trying to do as an organization? How, to your point, how do you align everything? And then if you are putting in an AI system, you would never put in an employee without any of that types of training and knowledge, but people are doing it every day. So then by creating this more symbiotic environment ahead of time, then you're better off. And here's another thing. I mentioned bananas. If you're trying to think, well, do I need a banana? Do I need some lettuce? Do I need that? I'm going to ask the banana salesman what I should do. So if you're looking for your AI integrator to do this for you, they're going to first put in the system and then try to retrofit it after the fact. Most likely, you really need someone with no skin in the game to come in and say, here's where you need the human touch. Here's where you could benefit. And here are all the pieces of the puzzle that you need to integrate into your data pipelines, into your algorithms, into how you're using it, where the human touch points are, and go from there.
Yeah.
It's not that hard, but it does take work. And again, if you just have banana salesmen throwing bananas everywhere, you're going to be slipping on banana peels every way you turn.
Or maybe more importantly, it's different from the way most corporations are operating now. And getting away from the status quo is a challenge in and of itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely is.
I,
It reminds
please.
me of the dot-com boom,
Mm-hmm.
where everyone was like saying, all we need to do is just like do this dot-com thing and we'll change the world. And then it turned out, well, it's really just a channel. And it's not quite the same, but there are similar things happening with AI saying, well, all we need to do is put in all these AI workflows and they'll take care of themselves. We'll do some tweaking and build data pipelines and we'll talk about RAG and this and that. And everyone knows all the buzzwords. But then you ask people, well, how does this interface with your overall organizational ecosystem? And you get a blank stare.
Yeah. Yeah. This reminds me of something that you wrote in the original book about Domino's going to the 30-minute guarantee. How would AI approach that? So for those groovers who are listening who don't know about this, Domino's said went on a big national campaign and said, if you don't get your pizza in 30 minutes, it's free. How should a company today approach this? Somebody brings the idea to the boss and says, if we want to really cast our shadow over the market, we're going to offer pizza for free if we don't deliver it in 30 minutes. How should we approach it in today's light?
So, look at what happened with Klarna, with like some of the other companies, with some of their missteps with AI. It's again looking at the overall picture, not just one variable. The one variable was time. It wasn't safety of the driver. It wasn't customer service.
No.
Here's an interesting thing that I think demonstrates that point. This was some work we did twice actually for a video game company, once originally and then to update it. Do you know what the biggest driver of satisfaction with wait time is?
With wait time?
It's not wait time. It's not how long you've waited. The biggest driver statistically of satisfaction with wait time is, did you get a good outcome? Because if you had a bad outcome, 10 seconds is too long. There was another study, I think this was a common one as well, where you had people stick their hand in painfully cold water for a short time versus warm, comfy water for a longer time. And they thought the amount of time they had their hand in the cold water was longer.
Yeah.
Shorter.
Yeah.
So the advice I would give, getting back to your question, is don't be parochial, because that is a very parochial statement. Look at what is it ultimately you're trying to do. You're trying to build customer relationships. You're trying to differentiate your service brand.
Yeah.
but that's a gospel that never should have been put in place. That
Yeah.
always 30 minutes, no matter if it's a blizzard, if it's heavy traffic, it's got to be there in 30 minutes.
Yeah. Tom, paint us a picture for what working in a fear-free organization would be like.
So the amount of transformation, if you do this work right, is just so incredible to see. It's honestly what keeps me in this field after 40 some years.
Yeah, you're still, for after all this, you're very hopeful.
Oh, very hopeful, very hopeful, because again, people are ultimately trying to do what they think is the right thing.
Yeah.
So if you could redefine that right thing and then get rid of some of the conflict, it becomes almost utopian. And the business outcomes follow. We've seen increases in, for example, first contact resolution in a call center from the 40s up to the 80s. Dramatic reductions in rework that saves millions of dollars. And the list goes on and on and on. You get back to that taking the NASA analogy, that joy when the rocket lifts off successfully, everybody feels that, no matter what role they played.
Right.
The best example of this I think I ever saw, and you had mentioned my friend Rod Wagner. He and I were actually cabin mates. We had the opportunity to be part of, they called it a distinguished visitor program on the USS Nimitz.
Yeah, actually, this is a fantastic story. Tell us about this.
So we flew out from Coronado out to the Nimitz on this rickety old propeller plane. And then when we landed, I think I now know what a bug feels like when it goes through a windshield. We caught the wire, 180 miles an hour to zero in like a second. So when I kind of came to my senses and, we went out, and I mean, the kid in me was like, wow, this is cool.
You just landed in a plane on an aircraft carrier.
Yeah. And you see the jets taking off and landing, and it was like a ballet. I mean, you had, all these guys, these kids really, in different colored shirts, totally perfectly coordinated, running one of the world's busiest airports that was tiny in comparison and doing it flawlessly.
Yeah.
And we had the opportunity to go around and talk to different people at different parts of the ship. And this was the really cool part. Everybody said the same thing. They said it didn't matter if it was, the ordnance guys, the pilots, the maintenance guys, or people serving food in the mess hall. They said what we do here is the most important thing on this ship, because we enable this to happen, and that helps the mission. And everybody had that pure, clean line of sight.
Yeah.
And that was so inspiring. And there's no reason why you can't achieve that in any organization. And when you do, then people understand why they're doing what they're doing. They understand where they need to jump in and help. They understand the constraints that everybody's facing. Now think back to the AI that you're putting in that is given no access to that and none of that in their decision criteria. Mm-hmm. It will destroy that dynamic if you don't do the upfront work right.
That's so beautifully said, Tom. Thank you for sharing that. We have a conversation oftentimes around behavioral grooves about how people can find their groove, how individuals can find their groove, how managers can find their groove as managers and leaders. And certainly one of those things is, it seems like you could actually enhance the experience of your team and your own career experience by reducing the elements of fear in your organization. What advice would you give to that manager, that aspiring leader, to reduce fear or to create a more fearless environment on their team?
Great question. And first, I would say not all fear is bad. I mean, people still need to feel pressure to perform. They need to know, if I'm going to be empowered and make a decision, it's a bad one, I'm going to be held accountable. But there needs to be the other side of the coin, right? It's like if we all work together, if we all do these things together, then we can succeed. And one of the keys, I think, for managers that we try to make sure we communicate is lining up what we call vital versus moral courage. And this is from some great work by the late Shane Lopez and Rick Snyder out of University of Kansas, where they looked at types of courage. So vital courage is all about me, right? My family, how do I make my career better, keep food on the table, etc.
Yeah.
That's what's good for the employee. Moral courage is about an idea. That's what's good for the company. You have to make sure you don't allow people situations to game the system where I do something that benefits me that's bad for the company.
Yeah.
Conversely, you can't ask people to do something that is going to hurt them, even though it's the right thing for the company, and expect that to be a strategy that's going to sustain. They may do it once, but that's about it. So lining those things up deliberately, we
Yeah.
found the keys. There's more, but stripping out the ghosts, getting that alignment, etc. But that's a really important one.
That's fantastic. I think that's a great thing to leave with our listeners. I want to leave though with a little conversation about music and about about wondering if you were stranded on a desert island in a fearless manner. It's a safe place. You don't have to worry about anything. You've got a listening device, and that listening device has 2 artists on it, only 2. And you get the whole catalog. But which 2 artists would you want to have with you?
And I don't have a
that?
piano with me to make my own music.
Well, okay, so yeah, you're an exception in that regard because you've been playing piano for a while.
But the two artists, God, that's a hard one. That's a really hard one. I like such a wide variety of music, but I'd say a couple of the bands I never get sick of. I never get sick of listening to Boston.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Because their music is so complex, but just timeless. Gosh, for the second one, if I'm on an island, I'm gonna want some chill music, and I'd probably want some good classical guitar to be able.
Oh, really?
Never, yeah.
Interesting.
It relaxes me anytime I put on some good, Andre Segovia or stuff. Just love it.
Would you trade the listening device to have access to music that you could listen to for a piano so you could play your own?
Absolutely, in a heartbeat. It keeps me sane. So.
Yeah. Tom, you're the first guest that we've had on that actually brought that up. And as I think about it, I think I'd be in your camp. I think I'd rather have a guitar on the island than a listening device because I'd rather be playing. I could be practicing all that time without.
You're not limited to just one band, right? You could play anything you want.
That's
I'm cheating the system, right?
Well, it is a bit of a game, but that's just part of it. That's fantastic. Any closing thoughts that you'd want to share with our listeners? Again, kind of getting back to this, how could you help people find their groove, especially as leaders?
I would say, a great question, and I would leave with just a couple things. One, there's just a little bit of work that if you do ahead of time, you can avoid a lot of these problems. And, especially with all the uncertainty and all the pressure on, again, the AI systems and what that's going to do to your workflow. You are more vulnerable to these barriers than ever if you don't do the prep work right for that. And secondly, when you're facing these obstacles that seem like are going to just drive you out, no matter how much you love your company, what it does, and what your job could be, realize again, these are things you did to yourself. And if you have the courage to look in the mirror and unpack them, they can be overcome. But it takes courage.
But it's doable.
It's very doable. It's very doable.
Tom Rieger, thanks so much for being a guest on Behavior Grooves today.
My pleasure, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from Tim's discussion with Tom, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our loss of fear brains.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great to just get rid of it? Like to just,
I don't know if we can get rid of it, but at least we can deal with it, right?
Yeah. I would like that very much, actually. And Tom, that conversation with Tom just reminded me that, man, fear really is a horrible, horrible thing within organizations.
Yeah.
And it's very largely self-created. Like, this connects me to Nick Epley. I'm sorry, I'm just riffing already here.
Go for it, man. I love it.
But Doesn't Nick Epley teach us that, and all of his work about talking to strangers, his work teaches us and informs us that we don't always know what's in other people's heads. And
No.
the best way to find out is to ask them.
Well, and we make assumptions, and we're fearful of what's in other people's
Yep.
heads, that we
Yes.
that we are going to look like a fool, or that we are going to be, whatever it would be. But I think there's an really interesting part of that. It kind of reminds me, was it Twain who said, I have had all these crazy, worst, horrible things that have happened to me, but only in my head, or something like that.
There is something like that. There is a Mark Twain quote about that. Listeners, help us out.
Yeah, there we go. Let us know. But I think that, what your conversation pointed to is that is a huge component that can inhibit an organization from really being at its best. And as we talked about in the intro, we put processes in place in order to alleviate that fear, right? Oh, I can, if I just make sure that we get the upper levels to sign off on this, and I get, 10 other people, looking and making comments on this, then I can't be blamed. So I can't lose, something, my dignity or respect or whatever it would be. So I think that's a really important piece. And there's an interesting aspect here. You talked about, because it's fear of loss. It's loss aversion. That is a big part of this. And I changed that around in this, that's the losing our fear in the brain thing. Did you see how I did that? Yeah.
That's very clever. Very clever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sometimes,
Do we need a small trophy for you for that?
No, just a moment of silence. So you weren't silent. You were laughing.
I was.
Oh my God. Fine. We'll go for it. No,
I'll do it later. No. I'll do it later. I promise.
All right. Let's kind of not torment our listeners anymore. So, yeah.
Okay. So for me, like, one of the most important things that I'm taking away from my conversation with Tom is this idea that it's not about strategy or logic. This fear of loss is a very individual thing. And I think that it's really, again, this is why it links to the Nick Epley research so closely, is that and just as you said, it's about us anticipating or assuming that someone else is going to say this. The number of times I've been in a meeting when somebody asked what could have been the dumb question, like, excuse me, boss, but could you just clarify this? And they do. And everybody in the room breathes a sigh of relief, right? Right? You've seen that.
I'm laughing because that's so true. It's like, oh, I should ask this because I don't really get this. I don't understand what's going on, but man, I'll look stupid. People will go, what an idiot, all of this stuff. And all of a sudden it's like somebody else does it and they go, thank the Lord, this is awesome. Thank you. And then I go, oh, now I look like the stupid person because I should have asked the question.
Should have just asked the damn question.
Yeah, exactly. I know. So
this is why I think it's this whole idea of moving away from naming it as it's bad strategy or it's bad logic or like you said in the introduction, you talked about bureaucracy. It's not always that. And, these things can just be fear and on an individual basis.
Well, you talked with Tom and you had the conversation. Again, I apologize. I really wish I would have been there. I was one of those other travel crazy things. But when we look at this, what did you take from like this idea of bringing the kind of Kahneman and Tversky's loss aversion into the work environment and how it's driving these things, as we said? What's your take?
We didn't focus on it specifically, but you and I know that there's all of our maybe not all, but so much of our behavior and our experience in the world is driven from the point of where we are right now. right? And this is the beauty of prospect theory, because it doesn't say that a gain of 5 things is going to always feel good, because you might have been expecting a gain of 10 things, and in your mind it
Yeah.
was a loss.
Yeah.
And so there is this aspect of wherever you're at in the organization, you probably have some expectation that is either matching with where the organization is, or it's not matching, not aligned with. You have a hope for it being different, or you expect it to be different.
Yeah.
And that governs how we start behaving. And honestly, one thing that Tom and I did talk about was it's kind of a pain to just think you're getting up and going to work every day in a world where you're going to get resistance. That's no fun, right? It's just no fun.
No, but there's a kernel of truth that there's always resistance. It's just how much, and is there resistance that is above and beyond what we would normally expect, or what we could expect if we had a better organization, which I think leads into this second aspect, right? Is where that fears then, and this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, where the fears translate into the organizational barriers, right?
Yes.
That they feel structural, but at their core, they're behavioral. That the structure is built because of the fear based that we have. Did I capture? I mean,
I think you did. I think you identified that really beautifully, and I think I give Tom a lot of credit for thinking through these things in the way that he did, the observations that he's made on the data that he had collected over all these years, while he was with Gallup, and subsequent to that as well. But it's just a terrible thing that we and humans do this all the time. Like, we're actually getting real resistance from one thing, but we misname it or we misidentify it.
Yeah.
Right. Because it doesn't feel that way. Like, this is a great example of how our feelings are more like a blunt instrument than a finely tuned, tuning harp. Basically.
Yeah. Well, in the book, he talked about silos and the way that, silos, they're like, we kind of ingrained in this, but, it's the fear of the other then outside of our silo, right? Is that they don't have, I know in our silo, they have my back. Outside of the silo, they don't so much. So I think it's so many different layers that can play in that you go, well, that's a structural thing, isn't it? I mean, silos are the organizational structure, but no, the problems with silos come because of the fear that we have.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because you and I have both seen organization where those silos are actually set up intentionally by leadership to create competitive groups within the organization, right?
Yeah.
We've seen this. And I think Tom's thesis on this is really spot on, that it's, in the end, those silos are not additive. They do not enhance productivity. They do not enhance efficiency. They do not enhance innovation. That ultimately, our competitive spirit is not conducive to really making the organization run at top speed.
And again, to get off of topic and just talk about that, I think there is a really important aspect of what you just said, is that competition can drive us really well in certain arenas, in sports, in competing against other organizations, in doing a number of, I don't know, you can think of a number of different pieces where competition doesn't bode well for us, is in competing against others who are trying to make the organization better itself. So, because then they are viewed as an enemy, and I'm not sharing insights, or I will maybe even actively try to bring them down. That competition does not bode well for a high-performing organization, even though people think it might, because I'm competing these two. The best is going to rise to the top, but in fact, what it does is you don't get the best ideas. So you only rise so far. And instead of rising even higher, that it just kind of impedes that performance component. And I think the hard part of this is that it's like some of the research that you've done on incentives. You would give a cash incentive for a short-term incentive, performance increases compared to the baseline. Right?
It does.
So if I was just looking at that, it's like 10, 15%. That's a pretty good performance increase.
Yes, it is.
I should be applauding myself on the back and doing like, yay. So if I'm a manager and I see this, I'm going to do that all the time. However, you didn't look at it from another perspective of adding in tangible awards as another. And when you add the tangible awards in from the research that you've done, that 10, 15% becomes 20, 30% increase in performance.
Right.
And I think there's the same thing. Like if we have two units competing, you get performance improvement. What you don't see is necessarily the negative aspects that are holding them back. And so if you had collaboration as opposed to that, you would even see a larger improvement. So, yeah.
Kurt, well said. I couldn't agree more on that topic. That was perfectly said. There was one other. It was great.
I don't know if it was perfectly said, but it was said.
The third thing that I wanted to get to was how these issues that, again, if you're like rank and file or you're a first level manager, you might be thinking, oh, the leaders of the organization, they don't suffer from this, or my boss or my boss's boss doesn't have. Stop that. Don't believe that. Send that voice in your head to a prison. Just absolutely no. Shut that voice down, because everybody in the organization can suffer from this same sense of fear. And that becomes a terrible thing when our leadership is also struggling with, I shouldn't bring this up in front of the CEO. And I've seen this in leadership meetings. I've seen it in town halls. Oh man, town halls. Nobody wants to talk until the big dog talks. He or she they're going to make the overall statement. And if there's anything controversial, none even the C-suite that reports to the CEO wants to take that big risk.
We're all human.
Yeah.
And CEO is as human as the vice president, is human as the regional manager, is human as the HR employee and the salesperson out there to the janitor. There is all types of human behaviors that we all elicit. And so when you think about this, that makes perfect sense. But we assume if you're up higher that you don't have the same issues that we do here. So, yeah.
So for me, the uncomfortable truth is that the barriers that we complain about are often ones that we create. This is the big takeaway for me from my conversation with Tom, that when we look at structures, we look at silos, we look at bureaucracy, what we should be looking at is ourselves. What are we afraid of? What are we not investing in? And what can we do to make changes?
All right. Well, with that, folks, hopefully you can take some of the wonderful insights that Tom and Tim talked about and use them this week in order to go out and find your group.